For millions of viewers, The Sound of Music was once the very definition of warmth, perfection, and almost untouchable innocence. A 5-Oscar classic that made the world believe in the beauty of music, family, and life at its purest. But behind that miracle, time ended up writing a very different story. Julie Andrews, the woman who once possessed one of the most beautiful voices ever heard on screen, would eventually come heartbreakingly close to losing the very voice that made her a legend. Christopher Plummer, the man the film lifted into immortality, spent years openly pushing back against the very role that turned him into an icon. And what became of those young faces who once shone like a dream? What did they lose? Where did they go? And how deeply did fame reshape their lives over more than 6 decades? Let's look back at The Sound of Music cast then and now, and see how time transformed their fame after 61 years. Number 1. Julie Andrews. In The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews did not simply play Maria. She almost seemed to swallow the entire film with the light of her own presence. At that moment, she was the face audiences looked at and instantly believed that gentleness could still rule the screen. Julie's beauty was not sharp or intimidating. It was the kind of perfection that made people lower their voices when they spoke about her. And her voice all but made Maria immortal, turning every frame into memory and Julie Andrews herself into a standard very few could come close to in that era. She was not just at the peak. She was the peak of a kind of Hollywood star the industry has only found harder and harder to reproduce with time. And because she once shone that brightly, the fracture that came later in her life felt all the more painful. In 1997, Julie Andrews underwent vocal cord surgery to remove benign nodules. But after that operation, she came heartbreakingly close to losing the very voice that had made her famous. For an ordinary singer or actress, that would already have been devastating. For Julie Andrews, it was far crueler than that, because that voice was never just a professional tool. It was the soul of Julie Andrews in public memory. It was what made Maria unforgettable, what made an entire generation believe that gentleness and magic could truly exist on screen. Afterward, she sued the hospital and the doctors involved, and the case was settled out of court. John Colapinto of AARP later referred to it directly as a botched surgery that destroyed her singing voice. Even so, she was still Julie Andrews in the public eye, still the face audiences tied to one of the most beautiful memories in movie history. But that is exactly what made her story hurt even more. When a woman is remembered by the whole world as a symbol of perfection, she is almost no longer allowed to break. People look at her and see the shock of a legend. But the hardest part was never the public gaze. It was the fact that Julie Andrews had to live with that loss every single day. No one understood better than she did that the thing once most deeply bound to her name and identity was no longer whole. Later on, Andrews spoke about having to find a new voice for herself as age and old wounds changed her. And hearing that makes it clear that this was never just a professional setback. It was a long, painful process of learning how to accept, adapt, and keep living after losing the most familiar part of herself. But Julie Andrews' story did not end with that loss. She did not turn herself into a legend trapped inside old sorrow. Instead, she quietly found another way to keep moving through time. Julie wrote books, worked with her family, continued appearing in film and television, and gradually found a new place for herself through voice work. By 2025, at the age of 89, she even won an Emmy for Lady Whistledown in Bridgerton. And perhaps the most moving part of all lies in that very irony. The woman who once made the world fall in love with her singing voice still found a way to be loved through the voice she had left. By 2026, Julie Andrews no longer carried the almost untouchable perfection of her younger years. In its place was something different, deeper, and in many ways even more admirable. She remains an irreplaceable part of The Sound of Music's legacy, and after more than 6 decades, the public still sees her as the emotional center of the entire film. Number 2. Christopher Plummer. Christopher Plummer came into The Sound of Music with the aura of a classical stage actor, a performer with serious ambition, a strong ego, and a temperament far better suited to roles with depth, pride, and even a certain ferocity. And yet, The Sound of Music did something no other role ever could. It made the whole world remember him first and foremost as Captain Von Trapp, the stern, disciplined man who slowly softened through music and love. That role made Christopher Plummer immortal, but it also locked him inside an image that never truly fit the man himself. In the years that followed, he openly mocked the film, calling it The Sound of Mucus, and let the world see just how uncomfortable he was with the very role that had turned him into an icon. There was something both arrogant and bitter in that attitude, as if he knew his own worth too well to accept being permanently reduced to a figure far gentler than the kind of actor he believed he really was. What makes Christopher Plummer's story so fascinating is not simply that he criticized the film, but why that discomfort ran so deep. To many people, it could look like the arrogance of a great actor, even a kind of ingratitude toward the role that gave him immortality. But looked at more closely, it feels more like a struggle between fame and artistic self-respect. Christopher Plummer was never afraid of failure. What troubled him more was the idea of being remembered by the world in a way that felt too simple, too polished, and too easy compared to who he really was. Captain Von Trapp gave him immortality, but it also forced the public to see him through a lens that was far too narrow, and that is the real irony of show business. Some people are not ruined by failed roles, but trapped for life inside the role that succeeded too well. Hollywood has always loved images that are easy to sell, easy to remember, and easy to turn into myth. But for an actor like Plummer, being turned into a myth could also become a cage so beautiful that no one noticed how suffocating it was from the inside. But Christopher Plummer did not let himself drown in that shadow. He kept moving through the stage, film, and television, and he aged in a way that only made him seem more commanding, as if the older he got, the closer he came to the stature he had always believed he deserved. Then came Beginners. Well into his 80s, he was still able to surge back and win the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 2012. By the time Plummer died in 2021 at the age of 91, The Sound of Music was still the first title people mentioned. But by then, it no longer felt like the sign of a shadow too large to escape. It felt more like the starting point of a long, complicated, and fiercely proud career. Christopher Plummer may never have fully escaped Captain Von Trapp, but in the end, he still managed to prove that behind that man was an artist far bigger, sharper, and deeper than the image fame had once locked him inside. Number 3. Eleanor Parker. How does a woman who was once one of the brightest faces in Hollywood end up being remembered by the world as an elegant but lonely baroness? In The Sound of Music, Eleanor Parker entered the film with the kind of beauty that shifted the atmosphere the moment she appeared. As Baroness Elsa Schrader, she did not need tears or emotional outbursts to leave an impression. It was her poise, her composure, and that perfectly measured coolness that made the character stand out. Not as a loud, obvious villain, but as the kind of woman audiences both kept their distance from and somehow felt sorry for. But what many people forget is that before she ever became the Baroness, Eleanor Parker was already a major Hollywood star, a 3-time Oscar nominee who had earned the nickname the Woman of 1,000 Faces for her rare versatility. She did not walk into The Sound of Music as someone the film had to elevate. She entered it as an established leading lady. The irony is that this very film later became the strongest frame of memory left around her name. And if Eleanor Parker was remembered on screen as a woman standing at the edge of a great love story, that feeling seems to have followed her in real life in a very different way. She went through 5 marriages, which meant stepping into and then back out of 5 commitments that must once have seemed built to last. In Hollywood, female stars are often treated like polished symbols of beauty, pride, and control. Women who appear as if every part of their lives is perfectly in place. But behind that image, Eleanor Parker lived through enough private heartbreak that the more you look back, the more Baroness Elsa begins to feel like something deeper than performance. A beautiful, composed woman who always seemed in control on the surface, yet somewhere underneath carried the feeling of someone who kept getting close to happiness without ever fully holding on to it. An actress with a rich career, one of the most respected faces of the silver screen, is now often remembered as the elegant woman standing just outside the most famous love story in the film. Time does not need to erase someone from public memory. It only needs to shrink them. And for actresses like Eleanor Parker, that kind of shrinking can feel even sadder than a loud public downfall. In the years that followed, Eleanor Parker continued working in television and then lived more quietly before passing away in 2013 at the age of 91. In the end, The Sound of Music remained the title most people mentioned first when they spoke of her. But what makes Eleanor Parker's story so haunting is not just that she once played the woman left behind in that story. It is that in real life, time seemed to treat her in much the same way. It did not erase her. It did not make her disappear. It simply and quietly reduced a long, remarkable career into a memory that was beautiful but not quite enough. And sometimes, that is one of the saddest endings Hollywood can give a woman who once stood so close to the top. Number 4. Charmian Carr. Charmian Carr was the kind of face that instantly made people think of youth. In The Sound of Music, she was Liesl, the girl from 16 going on 17, gentle, luminous, and filled with exactly the kind of dreamy innocence audiences always want to hold on to for as long as they can. It was never just a famous role. It felt more like one of those moments in pop culture that was simply too beautiful. So beautiful that for many people, Charmian Carr never really seemed allowed to step out of that 16-year-old version of herself. And that is also the saddest part of her story. After The Sound of Music, Carr did not go down the path people usually imagine for someone that beloved. She left Hollywood fairly early, built a quieter life, worked in interior design, wrote books, and kept her distance from the spotlight. But the farther her real life moved away from the film, the more public memory kept pulling her back toward Liesl. People still remembered that song, that smile, that age of 16, as if time had stopped at the most beautiful moment of her life. Charmian Carr was not undone by fame in some loud, scandal-filled way. She was simply held in place by it for too long, inside an image that was almost too perfect. Because when the whole world keeps remembering you as a radiant young girl, the life you live afterward can be too easily glanced past, as if everything that came next were only the faded continuation of a dream that had ended long ago. Number 5. Peggy Wood. Some people spend nearly an entire lifetime building a career, yet the public ends up remembering them most for that final moment, when everything has already begun to slow down. Peggy Wood was one of those cases. In The Sound of Music, she was Mother Abbess, the kind of woman whose very presence could quiet the entire film. There was a calmness in her, a generosity, and a kind of light that is hard to put into words. The kind that makes you feel as if the character is not simply speaking, but lifting the whole story onto a different emotional plane. The role was so beautiful, it felt almost untouched by anything harsh. And because it was that beautiful, it became the image many audiences held on to the longest when they thought of Peggy Wood. That may sound like a gift, and in some ways, it was. Not everyone gets a late career role that stays in people's hearts for that long. But it also carried a very particular sadness. Because Peggy Wood was never just The Sound of Music. Long before that film, she had already been a major name in both theater and screen. She was not someone that movie created. And yet in the end, many people remembered her first and foremost as Mother Abbess, as if an entire lifetime of work had somehow been distilled into one final image of perfect serenity. It sounds beautiful, and it is, but there is also something a little sad about it. because sometimes the public does not really remember a whole career. They hold on to the one image that feels easiest to love, easiest to revere, and let everything else slowly fade behind it. With Peggy Wood, the image that remained in public memory was almost too gentle, too radiant, too beautiful. It makes it easy to forget that behind Mother Abbess was a woman who had worked for decades, had lived nearly a full lifetime before ever stepping into the sound of music, and then passed away in 1978 at the age of 86. In that sense, the role was not just a late triumph. It felt almost like a quiet farewell that the screen preserved for her. Some women spend their entire lives becoming great artists, yet by the time they grow old, what the public most wants to keep is their kindness, their warmth, and something almost sacred in their presence. Peggy Wood is remembered like a final, beautiful glow. The only thing is, behind that glow was an entire human being, a whole life, and a career far larger than the peaceful image audiences still tend to remember. Number 6. Kim Carath. Kim Carath was once the youngest child in The Sound of Music, the kind of face that could make everything feel softer the moment audiences looked at her. As Gretel, she seemed to embody the purest part of the entire film. A tiny, innocent little girl who made it all too easy to believe that the life waiting for her beyond the screen must have been just as gentle. But it is the distance between that image and the life she later lived that makes Kim Carath's story so haunting. Years later, Kim openly shared that she had been assaulted when she was just 15, an experience that cast a shadow over her youth and changed the way she saw the entertainment world. It stands in stark contrast to the image the public still holds of Gretel, a little girl who seemed as if she had never known pain at all. In the years that followed, Kim stepped away from acting, lived a quieter life, and devoted much of her time to caring for her son with special needs while also speaking up for the disability community. Looking back now, it becomes clear that fame did not keep her in the light. It only preserved the image of an innocent little girl, while the real life that followed was far heavier and demanded far more endurance than most people ever realized. Number 7. Heather Menzies. Heather Menzies was one of the youngest faces in The Sound of Music, but there was always something distinct about her, something bright, quick, and almost like a girl standing right on the edge of growing up. As Louisa, Heather was not the emotional center of the film, but she became a natural part of the warm memory audiences have always carried with them when they think of the Von Trapp family. And like so many of the film's child actors, she was long preserved in the public mind as that youthful version of herself, as if the life that followed would simply be a gentle continuation of the glow she carried back then. But Heather Menzies' life did not stay as light as that memory. After the film, she continued acting, yet as the years went on, her story became defined less by fame and more by loss and endurance. Her marriage to Robert Urich was one of the most beautiful parts of her life, but in time, she had to live through the pain of losing him to cancer. Heather did not disappear into that tragedy, nor did she turn it into a loud, public story. She moved forward more quietly, spending years preserving her husband's memory and living with a kind of strength that was deeply private. In the end, what makes Heather Menzies most memorable may not be the fame she once had, but the way she carried herself through loss without losing her gentleness, a kind of strength that never needed to announce itself to keep time from diminishing her. Number 8. Richard Haydn. Richard Haydn was the kind of face many viewers might not remember by name right away, but the moment they saw him again, that sense of familiarity would come rushing back almost intact. In The Sound of Music, he played Max Detweiler with a kind of charm that was hard to imitate, funny, sly, and practical to the point of sometimes seeming a little slippery, yet never unlikable. Max was not the kind of character who dominated the screen, but he gave the film its own rhythm, making it feel lighter, less heavy, and easier to carry in memory. Richard Haydn gave the role a real sense of life, as if the atmosphere shifted a little the moment he started speaking. Richard Haydn's later life did not follow the kind of glamorous path the public tends to remember for long. He kept working, kept appearing, but as time went on, he became more and more like a part of old memory than a name still standing at the center of the spotlight. That was also the familiar fate of many gifted supporting actors from old Hollywood. They helped shape the soul of major films, but over time, what remained was often the feeling of the character more than recognition for the actor himself. When Richard Haydn died in 1985, what lingered was not the image of a loud, larger-than-life legend, but of a man who brought a very light, very graceful kind of laughter, and one that stayed with people longer than they might have realized. If the sound of music was also part of your memories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us as we keep looking back at the stars time changed forever.